The ASUS ROG Ally X. Is it the new king of handhelds? And should you upgrade from the original ROG Ally? In today's video, we're going to check out the full review. Once again, I'm Cameron, and this is Gamer vs. Tech.
Something that was real.
So let me start off by saying there's a million ROG Ally X reviews out there. Why watch my ROG Ally X review? Well, I hope I can bring something new to the table. I'm a little late to getting to this review. I was a little late getting to the unboxing, but that's because I've been testing it out pretty extensively. I hope that I can give you guys some insight that maybe some others haven't. And by the end of this video, I hope I can help you guys decide to whether buy, upgrade, or keep your old ROG Ally. So let's talk about specs, pricing, and where you can buy the ROG Ally X. As far as similarities go between the ROG Ally X and the original ROG Ally is the screen. The screen, still the same, 7 inches, 120 Hz, FreeSync or VRR, which makes gameplay really smooth. As far as other hardware differences go, it's mainly on the inside, and that is the RAM. 24 gigs here, 16 in the original, also faster RAM, 75 mega transfers. And you can really tell, honestly, that faster RAM does come into play with performance. The ROG Ally X does come in a 1TB SSD version, and the SSD is different. The original ROG Ally was the 2230. This has a 2280, making things more affordable if you want to upgrade and faster. The cooling is definitely different on the ROG Ally X. It has been upgraded, it's been slimmed, but also made beefier to accommodate, the bigger battery and a different chassis, but you definitely can tell a difference, and I was not expecting that at all. The original ROG Ally would get a little warm on the screen. This doesn't get warm on the screen at all. I have yet to hear of any problems with SD card readers getting fried, so I think that's a definite great hardware improvement. Another major upgrade compared to the original is the battery. The battery is an 80 watt-hour battery compared to the original 40 watt-hour battery. And guess what? You can expect double the battery life. The ROG Ally X is available for $799.99 at Best Buy. Is it worth it? We'll get to that at the end of the video. So I'm gonna do this review a little bit differently. I'm gonna start with the dislikes, and there are some dislikes. And don't forget, every handheld out there has some issues. My first dislike is the buttons. They're not terrible, but they're a little clunky. For sure, it just doesn't sound natural. Like if you were to use a PlayStation controller or most other handhelds, they're not as clunky sounding. And when I say buttons, I'm also talking about the ABXY buttons. The trigger shoulder buttons are actually really smooth. I like those a lot, but for some reason these ABXY buttons are just really clunky. I really wish they designed it in a way where it felt a little bit more tactile and smooth. Same thing with the D-pad. I'm a PlayStation guy, so I was pretty much born with a PlayStation controller in my hand, so I'm very used to the PlayStation layout. But when handhelds came along, I understood that the more common Xbox style controller was going to be a thing, so that's fine. But I will say, as far as the directional and the ABXY buttons go, they're a little clunky. They're not, like I said, terrible, but when you are playing games, you can notice that. It's not the worst, but it's also not the best. Now, I'm very picky about my handhelds. If you've seen my other videos, I like big. I like the X1, I like the Legion Go. I really enjoy big screens because it's not that my eyes are bad, but I prefer more detail. And with bigger screens running at 800, 900, or even 720p, you see more detail. So I'm not saying that this screen is small or tiny or anything like that, but I mean, compared to the Steam Deck, it does have a smaller screen. But the 7-inch screen suffices. It's actually not as bad as I thought it would be. I do have the original ROG Ally, of course, and I do have other 7-inch handhelds like the One X Fly, so I can get past the 7-inch screen. But if this screen was bigger, oh my gosh. So one of my dislikes is definitely a software problem. It has to do with TDP. When you go into the Armory Crate Command Center overlay and within Armory Crate and you adjust your TDP to either silent, performance, or turbo, it takes a while for that TDP change to kick in. So if I were to actually set this to performance and then go into my game or during game change it, it takes a while for that TDP to be set. So I could be playing Elden Ring, set it to 25 watts, and it may fluctuate. It'll fluctuate to like 30, it'll fluctuate to many things, and then it'll go to 25. This especially happens when I put it on the performance setting. I'll set it to performance, it should be at 17 watts, but it says something around like 20, 23 watts are going to the APU. Now after about 5-6 minutes, it does go back to 17 watts. It's not the worst thing in the world, but I wish it were snappy. I wish it were quicker than that. Oftentimes little things like that make me worried, like what's going on? Is there an issue with the hardware? It's obviously not an issue with the hardware. I think it's a problem with the software. Now, another issue I had, definitely believe it's a software issue, and this happened on multiple games, where I would play a game in like, let's say 720p in Cyberpunk or Elden Ring. I would have really good FPS. I'd have like 56, I'd be maybe in mid 40s in like more populated areas or like super graphically intensive areas. And then just to try things out, I would set the game to 1080p and I would get much better performance in 1080p. I was getting like solid 60 frames in Elden Ring, and it was, don't get me wrong, it was really nice, but I can definitely see more of a battery draw. But at the same time, that doesn't make sense to me. I should get much better performance in 720p at the same wattage than I should at 1080p. So it makes me wonder, what's actually going on? Is it that correct TDP? Is it showing me incorrect information on the screen? I've never had that happen with any of my other handhelds before. Usually if I set it to like 1600p, 1200p, or any of the higher resolutions, the frames per second go down because the device is running harder. So I don't know if it's necessarily a software issue. It seems like a software issue, but it makes me wonder what's actually going on. My last issue is with the controller, as far as sometimes it disconnects. Usually after about a few minutes or so, the controller will go into like a sleep mode or something. You'll see the RGB turned off if you have the RGB on. And usually all I have to do is rotate the analog stick and it turns back on. There have been a few times where the controller did not turn back on and I couldn't even use the ABXY button, so I have to like navigate with touch, and it's very confusing the first time it happens to you, like, did it break? So usually what you have to do is you go back in and do an actual restart. That totally brings everything back, but it has happened before, and usually all I have to do is do that. So it does not connect sometimes. I've only had it happen twice, but that was a problem for me. So let's talk about the likes, and I have a lot of them. Out of the box, you can expect the ROG Ally X to work really, really well. This ASUS is a great company. I know there's a lot of hate going on right now, but like I said in my last video, we're wiping the slate clean. I'm hoping that ASUS is devoted to better warranty claims and getting that behind them. So we're wiping the slate clean, but out of the box, the ROG Ally X works really, really well. There's no fidgeting, you don't have to do very much. It's just like install any other Windows device, update Armory Crate, my ASUS, all the stuff you would mainly do for any one of your builds or PCs or anything like that. And I really appreciate that. Now we can talk about something like a 1X player where I have to do a whole bunch of software stuff to get it working right out of the box, like changing resolutions. But you can always be rest assured that the ROG Ally X is going to work great right out of the box. My favorite thing about the ROG Ally X that has been a definite upgrade over the original is the analog sticks. They are definitely tighter feeling than the original. That was actually my biggest dislike of the original ROG Ally, was how loose the sticks felt. This feels way more naturally to me than any other handheld, in my opinion. I put this side by side with the PS5 controller, which I'm very used to, and it's almost there. Maybe a little less resistance, but I really appreciate the tighter feeling analog sticks. And that makes things a lot better for things like FPS games. Of course, a major positive and like of mine is the battery in the ROG Ally X. Like I said before, you can expect double the battery life. We'll get into more specifics, but the battery on this thing is awesome. It is a laptop size battery. I have gaming laptops with smaller batteries than this. So that being said, I really think that ASUS set the bar with the ROG Ally X. I think that every handheld ever made from now on needs to have this size of battery in it, because there's really no competition when it comes to battery life now. We'll talk more about that, but this is setting the bar. This is totally setting the bar with other handhelds. Other handhelds need to have at least an 80 watt-hour battery now. And because of that large battery, I'm not worried about charging all the time. That is probably the biggest gripe with most people in regards to handhelds is, oh, I only got an hour of gameplay, or I only have a few minutes left. It's really kind of a turnoff sometimes for handhelds. And I have big beefy handhelds, and sometimes I only get to game for like 45 minutes if I'm maxing out settings and I have screen brightness all the way up, RGB, all that stuff. But with the ROG Ally X, you can expect really good playtime. It's unlike anything I've ever experienced before. When I use my handhelds, I usually plan for 1 to 2 hours of gameplay. With the Steam Deck, you definitely can do that. With other handhelds, you really can't do that. Some handhelds, yes, if you're really taking down that resolution, you're lowering graphics settings, you're turning off RGB, HDR off if it's available, or any other things like that to save as much battery. With the ROG Ally X, I pick up the ROG Ally, I play, I don't even think about it. I'm not worried about it at all. I'm not worried, oh man, I'm gonna run out of battery. You really have a lot of game time until you get towards the end, and then you're like kind of surprised. You're like, whoa, how long have I been playing on this? It really makes playing games more natural on a handheld compared to any other handhelds. Like I said, you're not worried about it, but at the same time, you're just more enthralled with what you're doing. You're focused because you're not focused on the impending doom of your battery dying. As I mentioned before, the ROG Ally has faster RAM and more RAM. And does that come into play? Yes. And is it a like of mine? Yes. Because of more RAM, you're getting more RAM that you can allocate to VRAM. And more VRAM allows things to run a little bit smoother. You get to squeeze out a little bit more FPS. And now on top of that, you have faster RAM. And compared to my original ROG Ally, you definitely can notice that in many AAA titles. Playing things like Cyberpunk, I definitely get more frames. And if you're an FPS junkie like myself, then that's definitely noticeable. Another like of mine and definite upgrade is the ergonomics. The corners are more rounded, it feels more natural in hand, the buttons on the back are smaller. Like I said, the shoulder buttons are a little bit more responsive. The sticks, like I said, super tight. It just feels like a more comfortable device. Compared to the original ROG Ally, the original ROG Ally had these really sharp corners, and like legitimately over time, you could feel it in your palm, and you would even get like an indent in your palm. It just feels more sharp, even here. Even with the thicker chassis of the ROG Ally X, that improves the ergonomics. The bigger buttons on the back from the original ROG Ally, it wasn't it. I mean, this is a really good device when it came out, but it just needed some finer tweaking, and the ROG Ally really fixed that. So let's talk about gameplay. This was awesome. This was one of my favorite handhelds to test for gameplay. I will say this, I didn't test nearly as many games on this as I do with other handhelds, and there's a good reason. I've been really trying to catch up with Elden Ring, and when I started playing Elden Ring on this device, I got carried away. I stopped playing it on any of my other devices because it runs so good. So I tested out Elden Ring, and I also tested out Cyberpunk. So right off the bat, I'm just gonna go ahead and say, with Elden Ring and Cyberpunk, you're getting 3 hours. You're getting 3 hours of gameplay, and that's wild. If I play on, let's say, the 1Xplayer X1 8840U, I'm getting 1 hour. So obviously that smaller screen comes into play, but the bigger battery really hits hard here. The ROG Ally X plays Elden Ring so smooth that this is the Elden Ring master when it comes to handhelds. In my opinion, no other handheld, every handheld I've ever tested, does not play Elden Ring this smooth. That VRR really does come into play, and you notice it and you get addicted. So as far as settings with Elden Ring, you're gonna wanna set that to 720p, put it in performance mode. I really don't notice a huge difference with CPU boost on or off, so most of the time I have it off. But when that whole TDP weird thing happens, sometimes I toggle that on and off and it seems to fix the issue, but you really don't need it on. You're gonna get between 45 and 60 FPS, but most of the time you're gonna be hovering between 50 and 60. There's many times where I'm playing and I'm at 60 for several minutes, especially when you're in caves and inside buildings and stuff like that. But 720p performance setting, which is 17 watts, lock your screen at 60 hertz, and you're gonna have amazing gameplay. You're gonna play for at least 3 hours, and the screen here looks really good. So it's a great experience. And like I said, this was the best experience playing Elden Ring on any handheld. I was playing for so long. I had put in at least 16 hours during this test. I got very carried away. I think this is my new handheld for Elden Ring. So I will start by saying Cyberpunk also does run really well on this device. In fact, it's also a very smooth experience, just like Elden Ring, so let's just go ahead and assume that this is going to be one of the smoothest handhelds you can possibly use. I also did things a little bit differently this time. I ran the in-game benchmarks. Within the benchmarks, I used 720p, 1080p, I used the performance mode, and the turbo mode. I also did lock the screen at 60 hertz at times, as well as I set it to 120 hertz just to see what would happen. And like I said before, you can expect 3 hours of gameplay. So in order to achieve 3 hours of gameplay, you're definitely going to want to lower the screen brightness to at least 50%. You can go further. Sometimes I even set it at 0% if I'm in like a super dark room. You also want to turn your RGB off. You want to turn your Bluetooth off if you're not using it. Anything unnecessary, you're going to want to turn it off. But because of that 80 watt hour battery and setting things up correctly, like lowering the resolution and lowering the graphics setting, you're going to get 3 hours, and it's absolutely amazing. So during my gameplay of Cyberpunk, I was having a really hard time because I was enjoying it so much on the 7-inch screen. So when playing games at 720p and maxing out that TDP on battery, you definitely can expect FPSs between 60 and 100. Now, if you're in the city and during like huge firefights and stuff like that, you can hover anywhere between 55 and 60, but you're definitely going to be over 60 majority of the time. Sometimes when you're in buildings and in smaller areas, you're getting like over 100 FPS, and that's when you really notice how smooth it is with that VRR and the higher refresh rate. Holy cow, it's amazing. Now, Cyberpunk in 1080p is also really good. Toggling between the performance mode and the turbo mode, you really can notice some differences. Not huge jumps in FPS, but majority of the time, you're gonna get anywhere between 40, 50 FPS. The one thing I will say though, playing very detailed games like Cyberpunk at 720p or even 1080p on a 7-inch handheld makes playing this game a little difficult. You're trying to get headshots and stuff like that from people that are super far away. It makes it really hard on a 7-inch screen. Now, it's not the worst thing because you can always bring the screen closer to your face. Of course, that's not my favorite thing to do, which is why I'm addicted to large handhelds, but it's not the worst thing in the world by any means. So check out some of the benchmarks I got using various resolutions and TDPs with Cyberpunk. As you can see, Cyberpunk runs really well on this device. So during my testing, I didn't use any AMD fluid motion frames. I didn't want to muddy up any of the testing or kind of cheat with the frame generation, stuff like that. Yeah, sure, FSR balanced was on during Cyberpunk, but I didn't want to do any testing with AMD fluid motion frames. AMD fluid motion frames is absolutely amazing, and I have used it on this device. It definitely makes playing games a lot better, smoother, stuff like that. Yeah, you'll notice some latency, but AMD Fluid Motion Frames 2 is about to come out. I really hope that the ROG Ally X is able to implement it because it promises lower latency. I really do think that devices like this can really take advantage of that. So what's the sweet spot with the ROG Ally X? From the games that I tested, which was Elden Ring, Cyberpunk, Overwatch, Call of Duty, really the sweet spot is 720p at the performance mode, which is 17 watts. You're going to expect better battery life. The frame's totally fine. Everything runs so smooth, once again, because of that VRR. You can't be too much of a stickler with frames on a handheld. Now, of course, if you're running super powerful handhelds, you can get really great frames. But with the ROG Ally X, the main selling point here is the battery life. So you're going to want to sacrifice some of your frames for more game time. If you don't want to do that, then yeah, sure, max everything out. You're going to get great frames, but that's not how I tested this device, and that's not how I would recommend using this device. I would definitely recommend the 720p in the performance mode. If you can, lock your screen to 60 Hertz, and you're going to have an absolute amazing experience. So what other devices would I compare to the ROG Ally X? Well, the Steam Deck is definitely a top contender. The One ABXY, the Legion Go, the One X X1 8840U. I really do think that this device right here has something special, which is that battery. And that battery alone really bumps some of the other handhelds from their top positions. As we all know, the Steam Deck is a god. It's one of the original handhelds that came out when the OLED came out. I mean, geez, that HDR, the OLED screen, you really can't beat that. If all other handhelds can implement that, that would be amazing. But the Steam Deck has always been known for great battery life. They have the sauce. They literally made a really good handheld for playing games ridiculously well for how low the specs are, as well as great battery life. The Lenovo Legion Go is also a top contender because of that large screen. Now, the original ROG Ally and the Legion Go are practically the same as far as internals go. It has the Z1 Extreme, the same RAM, same speed, all that stuff. Now, the bigger screen on the Legion Go is definitely its selling point. If you could put that screen in the ROG Ally or the ROG Ally X, then I think the ROG Ally would definitely be better than the Legion Go. And then I think if the larger screen was put into this ROG Ally X, then I think this would be the #1 handheld you could possibly buy right now. So does the ROG Ally take the #1 spot for the best handheld of all time? No. My previous choice of the One ABXY X1 8840U still stands. It has an awesome screen, it's giant, battery life isn't that great, but it plays games incredibly well because it's so powerful. Now, between my #1 and my #2 spot, it's insanely close. The Steam Deck was the #2 spot. Now I think the Steam Deck has to share the #2 spot with the ROG Ally X. And the reason why I say that is because of the battery life. The battery life is absolutely amazing. It's better than the Steam Deck. Now the Steam Deck has that HDR OLED screen if you have that version, and that is absolutely amazing. It blows all the other screens out of the water, even if it's 800p. Now, I have to say these two handhelds are so close. They're so close that I can't make the Steam Deck #3 on my list. I just can't. They have to share that spot. I would literally do anything. If I could change it, I would, but I just feel really bad giving the Steam Deck a #3 spot. So they're gonna share. So #1, One ABXY X1 8840U, and #2 is more like an A and a B, which I think the ROG Ally X takes the A spot and the Steam Deck OLED takes the B spot. Now, as far as #3 goes, of course, I'm gonna keep it with the Legion Go because of the large screen. It still looks really good and it plays games really well, but it's still the #3 spot. So should you upgrade from the ROG Ally to the ROG Ally X? I think you should. The main reason is because of that battery. Now, you can always plug this in, you can always use a power bank or anything like that, but let's say you were on a flight or a trip or a long car ride. Sometimes that stuff isn't always easily acceptable. On a flight, not all power banks are approved. So really having the extra battery life and the better cooling, I think makes this a great upgrade, and I think you should buy it. Thank you for watching my video. I really hope that I added something different compared to all the other reviews, the unboxings out there, but I really appreciate all the people that have subscribed, liked, and commented on my videos. My channel is growing, and I really enjoy making these videos for everyone. Once again, my goal is to help people make better informed decisions when buying products. So thank you so much for everyone that has supported this page and this channel. Please, once again, like, comment, and subscribe. There is a lot more content coming out. I'm constantly getting some new stuff and some stuff that you've never even seen before. So once again, I'm Cameron, and this is Gamer vs. Tech.